Kevin Lee versus Iaquinta 2. Now, what really happened in this fight? This was a pretty close fight, the two fighters exchanging rounds to each other, and surprisingly, it was more of a kickboxing bout, where most people thought that Kevin Lee would have tried to make this as much of a grappling match as he could have. But what you saw in the fight is Kevin Lee was switching stances. In the first round, he was taking the southpaw stance for the most part, and Kevin Lee was going for one major tactic here, and that was to set up his left straight, because he has a massive reach advantage over Iaquinta, see Iaquinta's reaction, trying to get him slipping on the outside of the straight, and then he would try to throw up a left high kick, making it look like he's going to throw another straight left, and intercept Iaquinta as he gets his head on the outside toward his right side, and potentially land a devastating blow with that. But Iaquinta's movements are very quick and small. He never moved too much, and most of the time he was moving back on the left hand of Lee, but even when sometimes he would slip on the outside of it, his reactions are so quick, his eyes are so sharp, to catch Iaquinta with a very wide left high kick is going to be very hard to do. And Lee was never really able to catch Iaquinta doing that because of Iaquinta never really making these big sudden movements on his left hand, right? He's able to slip on the left hand, he's definitely going to be able to react and block the head kicks, especially because Lee wasn't setting them up like you would see Wonderboy Thompson do, where he would still throw a jab, make it look like he's going to throw the left hand, and as the fake left is following through like he's going to keep going with it, the left high kick is already coming on its way. So Lee didn't have the distraction completely, right? He just tried to get Iaquinta suddenly with these strikes. That's a very hard thing to do to someone who moves so slightly and quickly. And you can see Iaquinta was having some problems with the southpaw stance of Lee. He was having a harder time landing the right hand and defending the punches of Lee for the most part. In the orthodox stance, he had a lot easier time with the striking of Lee. You saw he was much more confident on slipping the punches and countering with the right hand. And actually, Iaquinta had a much easier time just defending the left hands of Kevin Lee. Iaquinta did have his right hand up the entire fight, and his left hand really low, and this will allow him to parry the jabs a lot more with his right hand. But his movements on the left hand were always sharp and active, whereas on the right hand of Kevin Lee, he was always in the way. Sometimes he wouldn't even move his head at all. It just seems to be some kind of defensive flaw in his game, or just something he's not seeing from the right hand of Kevin Lee. Very impressive the way he was slipping, dodging, defending the left hands of Lee, whether it be Kevin Lee being in the southpaw or orthodox stance, but the right hand in either stance, in any angle, at any direction, he had a hard time defending those shots. And Kevin Lee throwing a lot more jabs in his game, him taking the southpaw stance, it's allowing him to land more right hands on Iaquinta. The right-handed jab is going to be a big weapon for Kevin Lee, and when he took the orthodox stance, he was still landing the right hand whenever he threw it, but it wasn't as constantly used because he wasn't really setting it up a whole lot, and he's throwing a lot more jabs in his game because of the reach advantage he has. This is why the southpaw stance of Kevin Lee was giving Iaquinta more troubles than the orthodox stance. I mean, Iaquinta had that left hand on check the entire fight, countering him at will because of it. He was able to slip on it very slightly, some very impressive dodging ability, and landing counter right hands almost every single time. There was a point in the fight in the second round where Kevin Lee went back into the orthodox stance from the first round where he was taking the southpaw stance, and once Iaquinta saw the orthodox stance, he invited Kevin Lee to come in on him. He changed his entire posture, entire stance in front of Kevin Lee, put his hands up, very textbook boxing style, and it was very obvious what he was trying to do here. Kevin Lee throws a jab a lot, right? And he sees the opening down the middle that Iaquinta purposely gave him, so he goes in and takes the bait, throws a jab. Iaquinta uses the basics, parries with his right hand. Of course, when they're in the same stance, parrying the jabs with the right hand is a lot more useful because it's further away from the opponent, which gives you more time and a little bit more distance, just those split seconds to parry down or parry away the jab, as well as it's on the same line the jab is moving. Able to do that, and once he broke away the jab, Kevin Lee's coming in, and Kevin Lee is a very offensive fighter. Daniel Cormier was mentioning that Kevin Lee had defensive issues southpaw because it's a natural thing when orthodox fighters try to train in southpaw. Their offense is usually better than their defense, which is sometimes true. Sometimes it's the other way around. Kevin Lee was defensively not as good as he was offensively either stance. He wasn't very quick to move away, move in and out like many other fighters we have seen before, and he was still always in distance for Iaquinta to counter him whenever he came in with his own attacks. So Kevin Lee moves forward, and he's very aggressive moving forward. And the reason why Kevin Lee wasn't getting countered as much early in the fight than he was later in the fight is because Iaquinta was moving away. Like I said before, he was moving away from a lot of the shots of Kevin Lee, which gave Kevin Lee a lot more leeway to move forward. But as the rounds went on, Iaquinta was having more confidence, being more loose with Kevin Lee's strikes, and able to counter him many more times. So in this case, he broke down the jab. Kevin Lee's moving forward like he was doing in the whole first round, and he goes and runs into the jab of Iaquinta, right? And Iaquinta, on the orthodox Kevin Lee, because the jab was so much more utilized from Lee, and Iaquinta has that left hand on check, just naturally, just something about him. The left and the right hands of Lee were not really different, right? If he took the southpaw stance, his punches are very much the same. Very same with speed, form, power, everything involved. But the right hands, for some reason, are getting to Iaquinta. It must be just something with Iaquinta. He's not seeing the punches. Whatever it is, the right hand of Lee is a lot more effective on Iaquinta. And for Iaquinta's future opponents, it could be the same way. But the left hand and the orthodox stance of Kevin Lee, Iaquinta was so loose. He was so confident against that stance. I mean, for an example, later in the second round, when Kevin Lee was in the southpaw stance and he changes to orthodox, you actually see the difference in Iaquinta's movement, and you could just see his confidence being very different in the stance he is facing. Right? He's trying to trap the lead hand of Kevin Lee, and Lee is able to just bypass it and almost land on Iaquinta. Right? Iaquinta was able to push away a little bit, just slightly away for the jab not to land, and he tries to trap it again, so Lee doesn't use it, but Lee, he actually goes for a right hook. If this was a guy like Conor McGregor or someone who is very used to doing this to opponents, trap the lead hand on opposite stance fighters, they are almost never going to be able to land a right hook or a lead hook on Conor McGregor and many other fighters as well, even a guy like Tony Ferguson, right? Because you're trapping the lead hand, so you are expecting they cannot throw that lead hand straight at you. So they're going to try to bring it around. It has to be a very wide angle, a very wide arc to land it on you. You can see that thing coming at you. And Kevin Lee is still able to land an Iaquinta. It's just something about Iaquinta not being able to see the right hand of his opponents, as well as he can see the left hand. So Iaquinta starts moving to his right. He's trying to trap the lead hand again, and Kevin Lee does it again, right? He does the same motion again. Now it gets a little bit obvious. When you use the same technique twice against the same technique you just saw twice, it's going to be very hard to land on anybody. So he goes and throws a right hook, and Iaquinta actually blocks it and moves away this time, really being defensive on that one right hand. Not only blocking it, but moving away as well. Kevin Lee goes and throws a left high kick, which Iaquinta is able to move away from. And then Kevin Lee takes an orthodox stance from that left high kick as he lands it. And now look at Iaquinta's stance. Hands down, walking at Kevin Lee with no worries in the world. I mean, the difference in his approach to the stances of Kevin Lee were so apparent. It was almost like he was Anderson Silva out there a couple times. I mean, he walks forward at him. Kevin Lee goes throws the left hand, the jab, and Iaquinta just has it on check. What does he do? Slips on the inside very easily. Casually just slips on the inside of it. And goes and throws a right overhand over the top. It kind of glances off the shoulder of Kevin Lee, and you can see Kevin Lee drops his hand. Look how low his hand goes, right? If Iaquinta, he's usually very accurate with it, and even later in the fight, you can see how accurate he is with the right hand. This one, it just seems like it was a little bit off, just glances off the shoulder and still lands on Kevin Lee. But the difference in his approach is so apparent. And Kevin Lee, not only his footwork wasn't as effective defensively as it was offensively, and that is why Iaquinta was able to land shots on him, counter shots for the most part, it was also whenever he threw the jab, he always dropped it. And that allowed Iaquinta to come over the top with the right hand. Kevin Lee was giving him that open. It's a very dangerous opening to give Iaquinta. And not only that, even more important, Kevin Lee never moved his head the entire fight. Never moved his head. I can't even tell you guys one time in the entire fight he moved his head. He was able to throw jabs on Iaquinta. Iaquinta's moving his head on all of them, just slightly sometimes. Just a slight movement is enough to dodge these punches. I mean, the fist is not that big. If you could just get the timing down in the area it's moving, naturally through muscle memory, whatever it is, or you could see it coming somehow, you just have to slip just a little bit to get out of the way. Kevin Lee, just his head was on the center line. And against someone as powerful and as accurate as Iaquinta, it's a very, very dangerous thing. And you got to give Kevin Lee credit for the shots he was taking in the entire fight, especially in the 4th and 5th rounds. I mean, his head was always there. Iaquinta was target practicing with his head, and most guys would have fell to those shots. And there is one thing Daniel Cormier did say when he was commentating this fight, that the southpaw Kevin Lee was giving the takedowns, or at least the single leg of Iaquinta, a bit of issues. That is actually the opposite. He was mentioning that Kevin Lee taking the southpaw stance, his right leg is going to be forward, so it's going to be easier for Iaquinta to reach with his lead hand and catch onto the single leg. But when you go back and look in the fight, Iaquinta almost never reached for the single leg with his left hand. He almost always reached with his right hand, which means he is reaching further because Kevin Lee's in the southpaw stance. Kevin Lee's lead leg, which is the targeted leg for a single leg takedown, is further away from Iaquinta's right hand, right? So he has to reach across to grab onto it. Almost every single time when he went for that single leg, he reached for his right hand. And there were points in the fight where Kevin Lee did take the orthodox stance, and it was a lot easier for Iaquinta to get the single leg because he's reaching with his right hand. If he reached with his lead hand, it'd actually be a lot easier for him to get the single leg on a southpaw Kevin Lee. And Iaquinta being a right-handed fighter, wrestlers usually keep their dominant hand forward. So in wrestling, Iaquinta would be a southpaw in a sense, which is why he's used to reaching with his right hand. But he's taking the orthodox stance, so he has to reach further forward to catch onto the legs, which is a little bit backwards. If he actually worked on reaching with his lead hand, I think his single legs would be a lot more effective on fighters. But he never really went for takedowns with his single leg. He did something very creative, very crafty that Iaquinta's never known for, really. He's known to be this pressuring, headstrong, in-your-face, gritty fighter, and is showing the leaps and bounds he has taken in his career. People were saying Kevin Lee was making so many improvements, which he was. Iaquinta was making massive improvements himself. He was catching the single leg, throwing a spinning back elbow, as Lee was pushing away on Iaquinta to get away from the single leg, try to get his leg out of there, but Iaquinta just was landing strikes from his single legs instead of finishing the takedowns. This is something a lot of fighters, I believe, should be doing. It's another evolution to the game. Not only use your wrestling to take the opponent down, but use them to set up strikes while you have the legs. Because when you have the legs of the opponent, you are catching them unbalanced, right? And them being unbalanced, they can't move. So in this case, taking a single leg on the opponent, they're balancing on one leg. How easy is it to land a strike on someone on one leg? They have nowhere to move, and they're going to be tall, almost always. Very smart by Iaquinta. Then when we look at the takedowns of Kevin Lee, the occasional takedowns, which I still believe he should have went to more, he was using them when sometimes he would see Iaquinta move in with a jab or move in suddenly on him. And he knows after the jab, Iaquinta usually throws the right hand and he sits heavy on it. So he goes under for the takedown, goes for the double leg. And he's just so strong when he gets a hold of you. Iaquinta even mentioned it after the fight. And even in the first takedown, he was able to get pretty much a bear hug on Iaquinta. I mean, that's a powerful move for very physical wrestlers. It's almost like a body lock around the opponent, but you put your grip up higher where the upper back is. You kind of squeeze them in, put pressure on their chest. You could do it with your shoulder. Some wrestlers I know do it with their head. And there's so much pressure on the chest, it makes you just lean back, try to get away from the pressure, right? And your back usually extends past the legs, and then they could just trip you out, or they could just follow you with that pressure all the way to the ground. Very physical, powerful move for strong wrestlers. But Kevin Lee didn't even need the full body lock. He just had to get a grip around Iaquinta. That's how strong he is. Iaquinta has this defensive flaw that we have seen in previous fights, and I believe you also saw in their first fight. When he gets taken down, he gets on all fours. He gets into his base and tries to stand up. It's almost like he doesn't expect anybody to capitalize on him or get his back or something. Every single time he got his back taken from Kevin Lee is because of that. He turned over, got on his base, Kevin Lee sunk his hooks in. But thankfully, he has really good submission defense. I mean, he was always fighting one hand, trapping one hand of Kevin Lee and answering the phone with the other arm. Or with your hand, you can grip the back of your head, you could put it on your ear on the same side. And the angle of your arm that it naturally takes when you do this, it's hard for the opponent to get their hand around to choke you. So he's trapping one arm of Kevin Lee and blocking the other. And he's very consistent with it. So that's the end of the breakdown, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe. For my next video, it's most likely going to be the John Jones vs. Alexander Gustafsson 1 breakdown. So be on the lookout for that. And then my video after that will be my podcast sometime later this week. So be on the lookout for those. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.